Thank you all so much for being here. I'm very excited. My name's Oriana Leckert. I'm the Journalism Outreach Lead at Kickstarter. So my job is to go out into the media and talk to really fascinating, passionate folks who are working with words and see if they need money and help them get some money. So I've suddenly become very popular. It's really nice. So I want to thank BackerKit for hosting us in this beautiful space, and Anxy Magazine. You're going to meet Indy. She's my co-presenter of this panel. So yeah, here we are. We're going to do 45-ish minutes of panel discussion, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. I hope you've enjoyed these marvelous snacks. And thank you for coming out on this beautiful, sunny, I don't know what day it is, evening to listen to us talk nerdy things about independent magazines. Woo-hoo. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. Our first panelist is John SUEDA. He is the founder of Stripe SF, which specializes in print and exhibition design for art and culture. He has created dozens of highly designed print books to accompany and thematically align with contemporary art exhibits, many commissioned by California College of the Arts and other institutions. He is currently the chair of the MFA Design Program at California College of the Arts. SUEDA curated all possible futures for SOMART's Cultural Center in San Francisco. You can tell I'm from Brooklyn, maybe. And was recently selected as a member of the Alliance Graphique Internationale. John SUEDA. Next, we have Tim BELONAX, currently a design director at Pinterest. In early 2019, he launched Double Issue, an independent, nonprofit print magazine covering the past and present of important social issues like equality, immigration, and conservation, with, oh boy, a list of people's names who I'm going to probably mispronounce, so I'm just going to skip it. Y'all can find it on the internet. Previously, Tim was a design lead at Airbnb and a principal designer at Facebook's Analog Research Lab. He's an adjunct professor at California College of the Arts. He holds a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design, and his design work has been exhibited nationally and internationally. Tim BELONAX. Next, we have ROSANNA YAU, a designer, Y Combinator alumni, and the co-founder of BackerKit, the #1 platform enabling over 6,000 project creators to manage their crowdfunding campaigns effectively to date. She was the design director for the first Kickstarter project to hit 6 figures back in 2010 called Diaspora, an open-source, privacy-focused social network, working on both graphic design for rewards and the product itself. She has a master's in design from California College of the Arts and a bachelor's in communication design from the University of California, Davis. ROSANNA. And INDHIRA ROJAS, the founder of Anxy, an award-winning biennial publication exploring personal narratives and mental health through a creative and artful lens. She is also the creative director and principal at Anagraph. For over a decade, she has worked in the intersection of branding, editorial, and interaction design for The Bold Italic, Modern Farmer, Atlas Obscura, and Medium. She holds a master's in design from California College of the Arts and a bachelor's in communication design from Parsons, the New School for Design. Her work has been featured in the New York Times Magazine and exhibited at Pasadena Museum of California Art in Los Angeles. INDHIRA. Okay, the mic is not making a bad sound, so I'm going to start the panel. Okay, so I thought we would start all the way at the beginning. I would like to hear from all of you, what was the first spark that you can recall that would eventually lead you to start your projects? So I'm thinking either another beautiful print project that made you think, I could do that, or something mediocre or terrible that made you think, I could do that better. Tell me.
I'll start, okay. Yeah. So the idea for Anxy specifically started because I was listening to Mark Maron a lot. He does this wonderful interviews where he really starts really deep with someone, like, what happened, basically a version of what happens to you or how did your parents mess you up, tell me. And I think it's his way of learning about himself. And I started thinking, well, there's not a lot of, very personal narratives out there that are in print and beautifully designed that can go as deep as these conversations that I felt like Mark Maron was having. Similar thing happens in, for example, Fresh Air as well. And then I started searching to see what was out there that, had a design perspective, that it was also about deep personal stories and mental health, and I couldn't find it. And that's how I got the idea for Anxy.
So how we got the idea for BackerKit. So we ran a crowdfunding campaign back in 2010 and learned that it was a lot of hard work to run a campaign, and kind of did all the planning and everything, but kind of things pop up, and we kind of didn't expect the success that we had. So we set a goal to raise like 10K and then ended up getting like 200K. So you can imagine like that was a surprise, and with all these backers backing us, we weren't expecting this load of work. Like when you do a crowdfunding campaign, you kind of are kind of like running a business in a way, and it's like you're wearing like 1,000 hats, right? And all you want to really do is just like make the thing. And so, which is great that you have this many people supporting you, but like unexpected things pop up. Like you have to do a lot of backer management, and kind of just kind of, I don't know, you just have to like do everything, right? And so we thought like, oh, there must be like an easier way to kind of keep track of all these backers' information, and kind of with payments and everything. There's like a bunch of different things. I don't know how many people have run a crowdfunding campaign, but it can be a lot of work. So because of that experience, BackerKit was born just to help creators, independent creators, kind of get their projects realized and kind of help them out, give them like an extra hand in managing that stuff. And so yeah, it was because of our own experience, and we've talked to other creators and how we saw, and we heard about their challenges and stuff with making a thing happen and starting their own businesses. And so, and oftentimes they're like one-person teams, or like, a handful of like, you know how this feels, right?
Yes.
So like, just you and
a few other people.
Yeah, exactly. And so like, you need all the help that you can get. So we kind of made the software to kind of streamline a lot of that process for after you successfully raise funds on Kickstarter. So yeah, that's kind of where my story came from.
Got my own. So Double Issue really came out of two things. One, the results of the election, which I think, like a lot of creative projects, probably were born from a lot of frustration and the results of that. But also just the way that people were talking about issues out in the world, and especially through media. Double Issue is about looking at a single topic through time, so that we can really dissect the robust discussion that a specific topic has had. So the first issue is about personal freedom, and it's really about digging through what were people talking about in the 1900s, and how has that changed in 1950 and then 2010. And so the founders of Double Issue were really frustrated with the election results, and also just how people were discussing politics and events in their life in such a shallow way. So it was really born out of that.
The question is,
what sort of birthed your?
Okay.
Was there like what's the first memory you have that led to your creative practice?
So I don't really have like a specific project that I can think of, but I grew up in Hawaii. My dad was an architect, and so on the weekends he used to force me to come into the office and work for him when I was like 12 and color and make copies and stuff. And he had like these. This old-fashioned blueprint machine, that with the ammonia and everything that made you like tear up and stuff while you were doing it. And so he used to make me run that thing on the weekends, and it was always really exciting. He's just drawing on this little desk and making this little drawing, and then I'd stick it through this beast of a machine, and it would just like spit out this super cool blueprint. And I think that was, to me, like a really visceral experience that I can still remember, just like tearing up because of all the chemicals. And it really had a really deep effect on me. I think I was really interested in owning like some form of printer after that for a long time. I used to play with that a lot, and then in college I bought an old Xerox machine from a junk shop that I used to like stick all kinds of stuff through and experiment with things. And then I actually bought a press once, and it's actually like a bunch of missed opportunities through life of like buying broken equipment. And I brought an offset press when I was right out of grad school that I had it hauled into my garage, but then I never found a plate maker to make the plates, so I never actually used it. And then I have a Riso machine now, and I mean, like it's all these. I think these machines that have kind of excited me about just reproducing material.
Cool. Well, so before we get into kind of like the nitty gritty of like the making of the thing, you guys are all designers, so I would love to hear sort of how you developed your design sensibility. How would you describe the sort of like look you're trying to achieve? If there are mentors you want to mention or inspirations for like the designer that you have become, I'd love to hear about that.
Just keep.
Until we can also have some crosstalk.
Yeah, you
for
can please
now.
someone interrupt me. Okay. So I think that for me, it's sort of strange because I grew up most of my life in the Dominican Republic. I came here when I was like 23 or 24 years old. So the aesthetic of the island I grew up in is very, very busy and very loud, and a lot of like different like typography is very, hand lettered, and for me, going to design school was about learning how to kind of refine form, and sort of like I just went to the other extreme of trying to be completely minimal. And I feel like my design aesthetic has been this tension between, very clean, kind of like Swiss-like design, into also allowing myself to be very kind of crowded and messy, because that is really what a lot of, my roots are from in terms of aesthetic. And for example, I really love sort of Dutch design for like their layering and typography and all of that. So but then when something gets too crowded, I kind of start to feel like, okay, I want to refine it. And I discovered that through my work with Anxy, that there's this tension between it feeling sort of like constrained, but at the same time very structured and very layered, and in certain areas very busy. And that's like what I discovered about my aesthetic, that is like that interplay between those two things. And I like that we get to design every issue differently, because it allows me to explore that tension, every time.
Yeah, let's switch it up. So I love this question because it could take a whole lecture time,
Yes.
or it can take a few minutes. Yeah, just get comfortable. I mean, I find myself continually inspired all the time. The people I'm sitting up here with are inspirations to me, right? Anyone that has a creative practice, whether it's design or architecture or anything else, and is sustaining a family, they're inspiring to me. And that's not even, I'm not even getting to the work. I'm not even getting to what something looks like, because I think one of the things I did as a child was I collected a lot of comic books and a lot of like trading cards and things like that. And so that has influenced how I look for inspiration. So I might look to one person for their public speaking skills. I might look to another person for their use of process, or maybe someone else for their typography. And I start to sort of assemble these different sort of traits, and I just try and shoot for those. And I might cast some away because I might not feel like I need that trait anymore. But I think a current through all of those things is some sort of depth. I'm always trying to seek some sort of human depth in any work that I make. And that could be something that is just a funny insight, because there's nothing wrong with humor, or it could be something like really serious. And it's hopefully something that people see when they read Double Issue or any of the other work that I am a part of.
Rosanna.
Well, this is,
You just keep turning it off. Yeah.
well, this is kind of a weird question for me, because I feel like although I've had a discipline in like graphic design and all the interaction design, all this stuff, these days I mostly focus on product design and kind of building software. So it's kind of a weird thing. I don't feel like I do graphic design as much anymore, but I still can when I do have time.
But is there any like guiding principles that works for your product design? I mean, that's also its own kind of creative art form.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess the way that we kind of built our software is, I mean, honestly, just like trying, like iterating like a lot and kind of like making the smallest thing, the simplest thing that might be useful for somebody, putting it in front of them, getting feedback, and kind of just like, we don't like over design something. It's like you try to figure out what's the core message or the core value you're trying to put out there and how it can help somebody. And then, you know, I think it's just like we're always constantly getting feedback and you know, kind of like building bit by bit, right? Because I think that like, you know, everyone has an idea and it sounds so grand and everything, but it's about execution and like, you know, validating things step by step versus like, you know, kind of assuming that you have the answer to something and then making it and then nobody uses it or is helpful for anybody. So, you know, I feel like that's also maybe in graphic design practice too. It's just like you're constantly always like, you know, changing things and like, you know, and maybe like it's more like internal dialogue with yourself. But yeah, so it's kind of, yeah, kind of like similar to that.
Cool, cool.
That's a hard question.
It was intended to be.
Yeah, it's hard. I would say, yeah, I would like to think that it's what I do as a designer is sort of a combination of my life experience. Like I always kind of describe, you know, like when you say it's Aliens meets Independence Day or something.
Definitely,
you know, like,
I say that all the time.
So I kind of say it's sort of like Hawaii meets California meets Dutch design or something. Like it's sort of the three places I've worked and lived and that sort of influenced the way I think about design. And I could also, you said like in specific people, I'll try to stick to like print design, otherwise there's so many possibilities, right? So I could say two people that were my teachers, Ed Fella, who's also Tim's teacher as well, at Cal Arts, where I went to graduate school, who's this, you know, old man who's had an office in our studio, who was constantly generating these like 11 by 17 flyers about events that happened the day before. He kind of did them after all the time, and you know, he just, yeah, and no, because he didn't want to, I mean, he had this whole thing, I won't go into it, but he doesn't want to, he wants to let like all the students make the thing before it happens, so he just does it after for his own sort of entertainment. But, you know, he'd work with, you know, cut paper and collage and like a waxer, like all this old, like forgotten technology in a copy machine and generate this amazing, amazingly beautiful work that was super modest but compelling. And then Karl Martens, who's another a Dutch designer, who's another old guy who's probably almost 80 years old, who makes, I'm sure a lot of you guys probably know his work. He makes these. He has like a, what kind of printer does he have? Like one of these, like a mono print.
It's just a mono.
It's
yeah,
like a
mono.
steering wheel on a big weight that he just like puts on stuff, and he like inks up like old tools and stuff like that, and makes these amazing like prints that take a long time to make. He just sort of like wheels this thing around and lets it sit on there for days, and then lifts it off and makes these beautiful like overprinted shapes. And I really admire these. For one, that you can keep excited about design until you're 80 years old, and also this sort of slow process of sort of like a sort of lifelong investigation of like putting ink on paper. I think it's super interesting. Yeah, that's my answer.
Cool, that's a great answer. So you don't all have to answer all of the questions. These are, I mean, no, this was, so far this was wonderful. I was introducing the next section of questions, which are all gonna have like, I think, different resonance for different ones of you. So I was gonna talk a little bit more about print production, which is not necessarily something that you're all doing. But you know, that's the sort of, since it's a theme of our panel, I wanted to sort of demystify the process a little bit. I think even I mean, I'm a writer. I write words. I don't know how you make words come, you know, into a beautiful magazine. Like, did you guys know that we have a merch table, BT Dubs? But so I wonder if you, you know, if some of you want to talk about the sort of the operations, like the timelines, like the nitty-gritty stuff that is required to like bring these kinds of process to life, to go from, you know, an InDesign file to like a beautiful magazine in your hand.
Oh, that's like super easy.
I think,
It's very
yeah,
simple.
cool.
Very simple. I mean, if I start to sort of break down the process, many of you will be like, oh, this sounds like my job, or it sounds like, or you could see yourself in a component of what it takes to put these things out. There's a tremendous amount of planning from end to end. There is, you know, if you want that thing to be successful, there's a bunch of marketing that needs to happen. You need to get the word out. There are, in a lot of our cases, there's certain like backers. There are influential people early on that help shape the project. For Double Issue, we specifically had a board of directors where we would sort of test various ideas with them because they had a certain level of experience in this area. You know, all of that, like the actual sort of making it in as a designer, like in InDesign and all that stuff, that ends up taking like maybe 10% of the time. There's so much other things that go into it. You know, a lot of it is also relationships, how you build relationships with other vendors, how you build relationships with your contributors. We were lucky enough to be able to pay all of our contributors. That's not the same for a lot of other sort of indie publications. They're very scrappy. Yeah, that's the short answer.
That's very short. You didn't get very nitty-gritty. Get nitty-gritty for me.
Well, you know, it's sort of interesting because that's the process, but then there's like the part of the process you don't know. And that's where it gets messy. Like, for example, you know, I've never printed a magazine before. Like, I had printed magazines that other people took care of, financing the printing and finding the printer and doing all of that, but having to identify my own printer and get my own quotes and figure out, you know, who I'm gonna work with to make sure that this thing looks like we want it to look. Like, that's one portion of it. The other portion of it we didn't know was how much time and money it takes to ship things to people, and how used people are to receiving things instantly because of Amazon. Thank you, Amazon. So, you know, then you don't know. One thing I didn't know is how many emails I was going to receive about the magazine that never arrived, even though we sent it. Thank you, USPS. And so those are all the things that I think get more difficult, and I think it can get overwhelming because all of a sudden you just wanted to do a thing and you wanted people to get it, and then you thought it was going to take 3 steps, and then it's taking 20, 25 steps, and there's some of those steps that you don't even know how you're going to solve.
That's where we come in.
Yeah, this is where friend ROSANNA here. And yeah, that's definitely where I'm like, I need to use BackerKit. So you know, and I think that is where the hustle comes in, of trying to figure out how you're gonna make the thing that you're gonna make, and then how you're gonna make it real, and how you're gonna build those relationships. And if you don't know what you don't know, how are you gonna find out? And you know, that's the difficult part.
Ro, do you want to talk a little bit about having stepped in to sort of rescue a poor creative person? Not necessarily anyone here. I'm just saying one who might need some logistical guidance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, what they both said was just kind of like, yeah, there's a whole lot more to just making the thing, right? Like everyone here probably is really good at what they're, you know, at what they do. It's just kind of like there are other things that you don't get taught in school. I didn't go to school for business. I don't know, like it was just like a lot of just like, you know, elbow grease and just like figuring it out and just like failing a lot. And it's just like, you know, you can't let things kind of just like, you know, get you down. Like you just have to pick yourself back up and just like keep iterating, right? And just like, if you kind of like take baby steps, like, you know, you have to do that. Like, you know, start a mailing list. Like if you're kind of like, oh yeah, how do I build community? How do I get interest? There's some lightweight ways for you to do that without having to go all in. And I can't like stress enough, like, yeah, there's like a billion things you have to do, and you know, it's kind of like if you're really passionate about what you want to put out there, like you're gonna do whatever it takes to kind of to do that.
I think one thing that the few things that in the case of Ro, like she has helped me directly with was managing communication with 800 people that are all expecting a thing is not easy. Imagine if you're trying to manage those communications just through your email. And then the other part was that we take shipping, like logistics of things, of how one thing gets from A to B, for granted. And like, you know, one thing that happened to us actually that it was really funny was that the magazines got printed and we wanted to ship it by Christmas. And FedEx literally lost the shipment for like 2 weeks. And they had no idea. Every time we called them, they said the shipment was in a different country. And we just were like, we don't even know what to tell people. And yeah, thank God Bobby wrote this super hilarious email that people, I mean, that's the other thing, like, then when you have fans that love what you do and they see that you're doing it from the ground up, they're so understanding that it shocked me that people weren't like sending us hate mail when we were trying to explain that this happened. But those are the things that I'm talking about, that, you know, like you having systems that allow you to manage that level of scale, it's important, and it's not, like you're saying, it's not design.
Mm-hmm. I would just add one thing is that you don't have to do everything yourself,
Right.
which I think will end up saving you a lot in the end. It is these systems, it is other people that have done this really well. And I think for certain people, they're like, oh, I can do it myself, no problem. This is, but it's like, whew, when you see a professional do it, thank you.
Yeah.
I do everything myself.
And it all works perfectly.
And that's
every
why it
time,
doesn't
right?
work out ever. I'll talk about it. Like, I think these guys covered like the right kind of way to think about it, and I'll kind of talk about the way I've done it. I would say my professional practice has been in the area of contemporary art making, exhibitions and books for like museums and galleries and things like that. And for the most part, my hat is the designer hat, and I'm just designing, and everybody else handles all that stuff you're talking about. But then another part of my practice has been just sort of publishing at a really, really small scale. Like, I make 100 things, not like thousands. And I print it myself in my my office with my little machine. And on Fridays, take all the emails I got and pack up stuff and take it to the post office and mail it. And it takes a lot of time, and it kind of feels like a hassle. And for the most part, most of the projects that I make myself are really, in a sense, kind of not for everybody. The audience is so small, the interest is so little, that what's my point? It sounds depressing.
It really fills you up, John. It really fills up your soul.
On the positive end, I would say, like, you know, most of these things I make are discursive in some way and meant to sort of evoke some type of reflection about graphic design and a sort of alternative history or alternative mode of practice. And I love like printing it myself. I love like folding it and stapling it myself and individually bagging them, you know, like all this minutia of stuff that takes way too much time. But I really, you know, I enjoy that. I like, I do book fairs and stuff like that, and I think like interacting, you know, talking to people that are the few people that are interested in the things that I produce is rewarding. But it's like the scale is incredibly small compared to like what these guys are doing, but I do think what I do like about it is like total control, where you're responsible for like the idea, the writing, the editing, the printing, distribution, and it's such a small scale that you can really take a lot more risks and experiment with how you do these things, because there's no money in it at all. The goal in the end is to break even, or make a couple, you know, make $20 or make enough. No, it's make enough so you can make the next thing. And so that's been the goal for me.
Nice. Let's talk like triumphs. What is like your favorite thing that you've created to hold in your hands, and like what makes that thing the most special one to you?
It has to be, well, do I need to choose one issue
Yes.
of Anxy?
Yes.
I would say my two favorites so far might be the workaholism and the boundaries, but I'm gonna choose the workaholism because we were very intentional about wanting to layer the storytelling with all these data points that we kind of researched about work and workaholism and people's relationship with work. So as an object, I really like that you had these two layers of the personal storytelling and then the context of, you know, people's relationship with work at a statistical level. And then you can like read the magazine twice, read the stories, and then just read all the data. And, you know, from also a design point of view, like the design choices we made about, you know, using neon ink to sort of kind of have that like hyper active kind of energy to the publication. And I'm, you know, talking about what you were saying in terms of scale and wanting to be the person stapling, I do feel really proud of that moment when you get the magazine for the first time and you actually see the thing that was like almost like a fantasy. And it looks, you know, when it can look close to what you imagined. And then we do ship, I ship a lot of our magazines for the US. And, you know, sometimes I get to see Rosanna's name in a label and I get to write her a note and put it in there. Like, it feels really proud to just know that you did something that people are actually gonna experience in real life. And that's like the proudest moment for me.
My proudest moment is helping Indy deliver this thing.
This was always intended to be a total love fest.
It's rigged.
Wait, what was the question?
What's your favorite thing you've made to hold in your hand and why?
God.
You could have been thinking the whole time.
I know.
I'm going to give John some time to think. So I'm going to go off a little bit because we've only done one issue of Double Issue. It came out at the beginning of the year, so obviously that one is my favorite so far. A nice thing that came out of that though was Dave Eggers. We got a pull quote from him. He was super jazzed about this. I was like, if this thing doesn't sell at all, I'm just happy that Dave Eggers saw this and thought it was cool. But my favorite thing, sort of to Indy's earlier point about having someone sort of hold something that you made and sort of see that enjoyment. I think for me, it's actually this little note card that I made. It was a collaboration between myself and my mom. And my mom has had beautiful penmanship. And so I came up with this slogan that I felt like would sort of translate really well for when I needed to send someone just a really heartfelt note. And I worked with my mom on her sort of penmanship, and then we letterpress this thing. And so now whenever I really need to send someone something really valuable, they get a piece of my mom and me.
Oh man, that's beautiful. Good luck.
No comment, John. Okay.
I like the way phone books feel a lot. Like, because I kind of like how big it looks and how heavy you think it's going to be, and then how it's super light.
Oh, that's true. Mm-hmm.
I didn't make the phone book, but I really do like phone books. I think I'll talk about. I lied when I said I do everything myself. Actually, I collaborate a lot with friends, and I don't think Chris Hamamoto came in today. I really a lot of the things I produced in the last couple of years are sort of collaborations with friends, and I really like. This has nothing to do with your question.
That's cool.
But I really enjoy the feeling of producing something in collaboration with someone, a third thing that you wouldn't make alone. I think that's not your question, but I'm gonna stick to that.
Well, but
answer.
so pick one. What's a really lovely one, and like share the story with us.
I like some of the stuff on the table.
Do you want
I brought
to
today.
explain, entice people to maybe visit the
Just
table?
go check it out, please.
Okay, we're gonna move on. Well, I was gonna, kind of along those lines, I was gonna ask about like a moment where you really connected with a reader, with someone maybe that like you didn't know was a fan of your work that, you know, came up and talked to you about it, or maybe you did know them and they had a reaction to something that you made that was really meaningful. Like, does anybody have like an anecdote like that to share?
I do. Yeah. I have multiple actually. So we actually do get a lot of love mail, which, you know, it's great. But I think that the things that impact me the most is when we get a few emails, but there is this one that I actually use in presentations because for me it talks about, you know, one of the values of even doing everything ourselves and doing this work is the impact that you create in other people's lives and their experience of what you've made, regardless of what that is. And when people tell you that, it's just reaffirming. So we got this email, someone was saying that, you know, otherwise if it wasn't for our magazine, that she felt like there really wasn't a community out there to talk about these issues, and that for her it made her feel like she wasn't crazy, and that she wished something like this existed previously so she didn't have to spend her, you know, her life walking around feeling that there was something wrong with her. And that was very moving to me because I feel like, again, it just reaffirmed the reason why we made Anxy, and that is, this is, you know, as designers, there's stuff in the world that feels like, oh, it's cool stuff, and I love it. But then the depth of it sometimes is shallow, and when you get to make something that has social impact and that level of you know, connection with people, I think is really special. And I think that's the reward for the work that we do. So.
Yeah, lovely. More, Mas.
I mean, I already mentioned the Dave Eggers quote, but an earlier book that I worked on called The Reward is in the Process was actually influenced by a show at CCA. And it ended up getting written up in Design Observer by a really lovely writer, Rob Walker, who actually has just come out with his own book called The Art of Noticing. And the Reward is in the Process is on Blurb, and these are sort of design excursions, sort of meant to sort of break you out of your mold if you're sort of feeling a little bit stuck. It's influenced by things like oblique strategies and John Baldessari's optional assignments. But having someone that I looked up to out of the blue write up something like that was really rewarding, and I think it's something that I've really cherished a lot more as I've sort of grown as a designer. It's that not necessarily like looking for that one reward to sort of fulfill you. It's like cast your net a little bit wider.
I think for me, what's really rewarding is when we help someone who's, you know, trying to make a thing that they're really passionate about. They, you know, haven't like done this before, and you know, they fulfill their Kickstarter campaign, and they come back and do another one. And it's really rewarding because, you know, this one customer of ours, I remember when we first started, she like, you know, we had a phone call, and she's like, oh, I'm glad you guys are here. I didn't know what a fulfillment center was. I didn't know how to manage people. And, you know, 6-some years later, she's like done like, you know, 5 projects already. She's like on Target.com. Like she's kind of like grew this business herself, and I'm like super proud of like us being a part of that journey because, you know, I think a lot of people, you know, think like, oh, you do a Kickstarter project and it's like a totally one-off thing, but some people are actually building their businesses off of it. And, you know, they do one, they validate that, they build a community, and, you know, they make enough to just actually just do the second one. And then, you know, they kind of, you know, it's kind of cool to see people scale because it's not that easy. And so it's really rewarding to see people come back and do multiple Kickstarters. So that's what makes me happy.
Do you want to just answer a different question?
Yeah. I like, you know, sometimes I like when people want to trade me for a book.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
I mean, that's like, it's not, you know, it's more than, to me, it's more interesting than if they just buy your book. If someone trades you something, and sort of, I don't really know how to explain it, but I feel like that's a nice moment when you like trade something with someone.
That's super lovely. That totally counts. What's something that you haven't done yet but you really want to? Like, what is your hope for either the future of your practice, or, you know, a way that you would like to design or create or, you know, manage the next thing that you're really excited to try?
Before people stop sending letters, I want to make a stamp.
Like for the post
For
office?
the post office, yeah.
Cool. What will be on it?
I don't know. I got to figure that out before something happens.
That's a good goal. I love it.
Yeah.
It's like either that or put something into space. Like a logo on a rocket would be pretty cool, I think.
That would be cool.
Before
That's
space
a
gets
high
all
bar.
like,
Now I can't. I don't know. John, you
They're
go.
very
How
simple
about you?
things.
I want to replace like CMYK with fluorescent blue, fluorescent yellow, fluorescent pink, and gold. Or no, black, and then, or yellow, or gold.
Wait, so what you're saying is you just want to change how color works in the words?
Yeah.
A simple thing to ask.
Modest goals. Indie, bro, come on, modest goals.
I can't beat any of this.
I don't know. I'm going to change light and how it reflects off color.
No, I think those are good ones. I'll let those two stand.
Okay. I'm not checking Twitter, I promise. I'm just checking the time. Okay. I'm going to ask, but if I were checking Twitter, if you people notice, all of our Twitter handles are up there if you want to follow us. But I'll close out with one more question, which is much, less technical and world-shattering, I guess. But I would just love to hear what you guys are reading, whether it's books, magazines, Twitter feeds, anything that is exciting to you.
Anxy magazine.
I started a lot of books and then I just put them on pause. But the one that I keep wanting to come back to is this one I started called The Body Keeps the Score. And it connects really well with the work I would do with Anxy. One of the things I try to do in my reading is try to get us educated about psychology as possible so that I can have language to talk about my experience. And that book is really good in terms of talking about trauma and how trauma impacts us and the things that it does to our bodies and to our mind and to our behavior and how do you decode that. And I think it's a really good book. So.
Steph Curry bio. It's really good.
I just finished Stupid Arbitrary Goal by Tamara Shopson. I think actually being from Brooklyn, so apparently her family is pretty famous for this restaurant called Shopson's in New York.
Oh, yeah. Yes, of
There you
course.
go, validated. And it's really, the book feels like you're sitting on a stoop with a friend just hearing about life. And I feel like especially in San Francisco, you don't really get those feelings or those vibes. And it was just a lovely book just about life. So I just finished that, and then I just started this book called The Ends of Collage. It was a London exhibit, I think in 2018, 2017. And the book is a collage of writings about collage, which is one meta thing that I love. But on top of that, it's scratching this assumption that I have that as technology becomes more powerful and we start sharing images even more and more, especially video, that there's going to be this sort of newer, I think, this not newer aesthetic, but I think John might be familiar with the pendulum of aesthetics, where we might swing over to minimalism for a while and then we might swing back to something that's a little bit more maximal. And I feel like we're swinging back a little bit to something that's more maximal, and I think collage is actually going to come back. And so I'm let me read up on this and sort of try and validate, because it goes through the history of the first collages and then sort of things in the middle and then things in the end. So.
Cool. I'm going to answer my own question just because I'm excited about what I'm reading right now. An hour before I got on the plane to come here, a friend of mine who works at Random House gave me an advance copy of the new Gia Tolentino. She's a New Yorker writer. I think she's one of the best writers we've got going right now. It's a book of essays called Trick Mirror. The first essay is it's called The Eye in the Internet, and it's about how the entire world has been essentially reframed so that we are all the center of our own story and only finding the things that are most important to us. And then the next essay is about the time that she was a teenager on a reality show. It is fabulous, and I really recommend it very highly. So that's what we've got planned. If there are questions, we're recording this, so if you have questions, come up and I'll hand you my mic, or if you feel uninterested in coming up, just yell it and I'll repeat it. Ask us things.
So this is just a general question. If you had to go back and give yourself advice, when you were getting into design, what would you tell yourself then?
That's a great question. Great question.
You mean undergrad or MFA?
You can pick either one.
Yeah, okay. think for me, I think that I know like confidence is something that we, a lot of us work on, and like trusting our own voice and just kind of like following our gut for what interests us. And I would say that is a surprise that I had with Anxy. Like I usually resist. I do a lot of client work. Similar. I have a practice, and you are at the service of other people. So like doing something that comes just from you, following your own intuition and your own curiosity. It can be challenging, especially if you don't feel confident or you have insecurities. And I wish I could just have trusted that earlier, because I feel like I would have produced more work that comes from me rather than the work that I do for other people.
Yeah, I would say for someone that's just starting out, I would say like it's okay to not know what's going on. Similarly to sort of the confidence thing, I think it's a component of that, but it's also a component of not being afraid to ask for help, but not holding on to that help too preciously, because I think as design has sort of evolved, there's almost like there's so many ways of being a designer that so many different people are going to say this is the way to do it, that's the way to do it, that's the way to do it, and if I were to go back and say like, listen to that person, take what you can from them, but know that that is not sort of the set in stone way. That would be my advice to early me.
Don't overthink stuff, I guess. I have the blessing of not thinking so much before I do things. And I only think about it after I did it, if that was a good thing to do. And sometimes it gets me into a lot of trouble, but but in general, I think a lot of you guys might have had me as a teacher or went through the program at CCA, and I think that I just see students just like talking themselves out of everything, and so I for some reason I don't talk myself out of anything, which is also bad because I just do everything that
Set out to change all the color in this world.
Yeah, just like, they're not important things. Sometimes they're just things that aren't very important, but when you say yes to everything, that sometimes can be good, but sometimes bad.
I guess I would agree with everything that everyone said here. I don't know what I would tell myself back then. I feel like I was kind of like all over the place, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was like okay with that. And actually it was funny because I think at the end of thesis, John was like, what are you gonna do? Like, he's like, you need to choose a thing. You need to choose something, because I was like, I don't know. Like, I like to do everything. And so I think that for me, at that point, I was like, oh, maybe I should just choose one thing. But I think it served me well to not listen to John and like just, kind of just be raw and just kind of like, kind of what you said about just do the thing and see what happens. I feel like I am here because of all the things that I, decided to work on because I was passionate about it, and it somehow led me here. And so I don't know if I would change anything necessarily. I know that one thing that I'm sure everyone is pretty hard on themselves. So just try to be less hard on yourself, and just be fearless and just kind of just do the thing and see where it takes you. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say similar if I'm answering questions that things are gonna work out in a much weirder and cooler way than you possibly think they will. So just keep doing the things.
I wish I was born in the 60s, because then I would have become a designer in the early 90s, which would have been a really good time to be a designer.
That is really good advice.
Good
to your
advice.
younger self. Yeah. More questions.
Yeah, be born earlier.
Come up and ask us something.
I'll stand on
Okay.
What's something new, technique, person, object, what's something new that you're really excited about?
The most thing new that's new but not new that I'm excited about is everything that's happening with RESO. I just feel like I'm seeing so many designers sort of having this thing at home that there is no buffer between them and whatever they can make. and it looks awesome. A machine is doing it, so it has that still screening effect, but you don't have to get dirty, you don't have to burn the screen, you don't have to do the thing, and I just love like what people are just producing. It's something that I'm just like, I love it. So.
I mean, Rezo is like a panel unto itself, which would probably be some of the similar people. Something new. I was talking with someone the other day, and it's not necessarily new, but we were talking about the maturation. I'm trying not to get too heavy on this. There's something going on right now with actually, was it today or yesterday? Like Slack had an IPO. I think there's a lot of companies, especially around here, that are going through that. And I think that there's something to be said for design in that space for that thing that doesn't get talked about, because it's a very volatile, financially tricky situation. And I've just come out of something like that, and so I'm like kind of fascinated by like the war stories that people have around that, because it's a very unique experience. But at least in this community, it's something that's happening right now, and so I want to understand that more. So it's new to me, but not that new.
I gotta think.
I mean, yeah, Rezo's pretty hot right now, and I'm into it as well. I helped my friend assemble some zines. I still do some. I'm down. I'm still down with print. Come on. And so, but I don't know. I just like Xerox machines and just like making weird stuff off of that, and just like smudging, and kind of seeing, what comes out of it. So it's not new, but I still enjoy that, and yeah. So
That's cool, yeah.
is that enough time, John?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I kind of, I'm really into this sort of, I just keep it to publishing and printing, because otherwise I might say something off topic. There's a lot of people sort of exploring this sort of like web to print kind of thing, or like using like web, like tools on the web to create print design, which I think is, I don't know if it's new, it's sort of, but I find it to be interesting as sort of misusing the tools designers use to make new form, and I find that to be a compelling, I'm sort of interested myself, this idea of the Rezo becomes sort of the end tool to make the thing, but creating sort of digital sort of online tools to generate print design, which you then sort of print in a like a kind of tactile way, but it's all coming from a sort of these digital tools.
Cool. Yeah.
I would love to know your thinking about designing content for a magazine, because I really understand how to design a page, and I understand how to design a film. And so there's a kind of narrative arc that you develop. It's a form of storytelling that I'm fascinated by, but I have to admit, I primarily look at it from a visual point of view, but I would love to understand some of your thinking about developing your individual magazines, your learnings.
I mean, I think you mentioned film, right? And that you're comfortable sort of in designing that. I mean, one magazine that we looked at that is heavily inspired by film is California Sunday. And the way that they structure their stories. For double issue, we sort of have a larger arc within the whole magazine. So most of the stories up front are sort of more earlier in time, and then it goes sort of more towards present day. And so we were really trying to seek, not only chronologically, but trying to be influenced in sort of a filmic way. Whether or not we did it well, you can look at the magazine, but that was sort of our biggest influence. And also the sense of really making sure that you're respecting the reader and the time that they're spending for something, and being very careful with how much content you're putting in there and what you're promising. Because I think that we can easily get overly excited about what we want to say, and then all of a sudden you're reading 5,000 words on something that is not worth 5,000 words. So being really rigorous with your editing.
Yeah, with Anxy is very unique because we have open submissions, so people send us their stories. So we just define the theme, and then they get to write what they want to write with that perspective. And then there's the other angle, which is like then we commission a few pieces. So we end up sort of taking all the stories that we consider relevant and trying to piece them together to create that arc. And usually the way that we create the arc sometimes have to do with length. Let's put the short stuff in the front, and then they have the feature in the middle to create the climax. We all usually end with, a comic or something visual to sort of like smooth out from the experience. But it really takes kind of having all of the stories to kind of figure out how they need to be sequenced together to work with the material that we have, because we sort of have some control but not all of the control, because it's really like what is being given to us that we're trying to assemble. So, but I think it's about sort of like creating those moments where, like, if you're watching a movie, right, like where it's a moment of pause, where it's the moment of reflection. And we have that thing with Anxy, which like we can't put a lot of stories together that are like super emotional because people get overwhelmed. So that's the thing that we worked on over and over. Sometimes we start designing the magazine thinking it's going to be in this order, and then at the end we switch it around because it just becomes too much.
We could do maybe like 2 more questions. Yeah, come on up.
Do you mind if I just
I do not mind.
when you start a project, you're super excited, you have a vision, and then at some point sooner or later you kind of get stuck and start to feel discouraged or overwhelmed. Do you have any tips on how to like regain momentum at that wall?
For the recording, it is how to regain momentum after you lose it in the creative process.
Talking to other people trying to make things. Because what I discovered is that everyone hits that moment, and you hear about other people's war stories, and then you realize, oh, we're all trying to do the same thing, and this is part of the process. And eventually you'll kind of problem solve yourself out of it and get that energy that was missing. I think like the risk is sometimes we can burn ourselves out, and I think it's harder to get out of a situation like that. But I do think that talking to other people and hearing about how they figured it out and how difficult it was, it just normalizes it for you, and it makes you feel, okay, I think this is just part of what we're trying to do here.
That's the only answer to that question.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Next question.
Community is the secret to life.
I have an answer.
Yeah.
I would suggest working in the morning. Like, I mean, I
That is such a practical answer.
No,
I was
I mean-
not expecting that.
I mean, like, and just, because I suffer from having too many, I mean, I'm doing my own, like, a Kickstarter, and everybody's mad at me on Kickstarter because of my project's, like, months late. But,
I didn't know I was supposed to be
sorry, can you revoke the funds? I hope not.
I don't think that's how it works.
But basically, I wasn't really giving myself any time to like work on the project, and when I started just saying, I was kind of joking, but in the morning, your brain is actually working, and a lot of this stuff, to be honest, becomes like late night weekend work, and because it's stuff that you're doing outside of your like day to day, and so a lot of times I'll just start working at different times of the day when I'm actually like coherent, and I just get things done way faster if I start at a different time. And it has nothing to do with really being stuck, because I actually don't. A lot of people talk about being like creatively stuck, and I don't really get that. It's more about just being stuck because you're not like ready to work and get things done, because you're just tired and stuff. So I just work in the morning.
I love that advice, actually.
Huh?
Yeah,
It's
that's really good. I think someone in the back was raising. Okay.
All right, so my question is,
I think you're not supposed to be too.
I'm not sorry. My question is, how close do you stand to the mic? So you print physical publications. I love the smell of paper, the feel of paper. I'm sure you all do. California Magazine is a good example as a print mag, but they also have a beautiful website. So of course, if I had the choice to look at a website or pick up a magazine, I'd pick up a magazine. But in this day and age, as we are, struggling a little bit to keep paper alive. I'm sure it won't ever go away, but do you feel like there's a disservice done by having both? Do you feel like it's important to have both, and should they live separately? And what's the relationship that you feel magazines, physical publications have, and will we ever get the same feeling online? Is that a relationship that you hope to grow? Is that ever an intention behind the
This
publication?
is so many questions.
But yeah, just what's that relationship? Sorry, that's kind of what I'm hoping to get out of that.
They're all good, but that was like, you just designed our whole next panel.
That's what I said. Yeah.
I think it depends on what relationship, if you're making a magazine, what relationship you want it to have to a website. Because I do think that there are some great, like the New York Times does fantastic, web work when they really want to do something like really big. I think when, what was it, like Snowfall was like one of their first pieces where you're like, oh my God, this is what the web can do with storytelling. But for us, specifically with Double Issue, it was really about, we needed, we chose to sort of host it somewhere where people could donate and they could buy a copy and they could learn about it, and that was sort of it. But we also saw the web as a place to sort of publish B-roll, so that could be on Instagram or Facebook or elsewhere. But that was the role that we chose because we didn't have someone to sort of handle a website or handle sort of something more robust. But we also made a printed magazine because we love to sit with something. And so maybe it's okay that we don't have to sort of invest the same amount of storytelling and labor on a digital platform. So that was our take.
I would say that this has been a source of great debate at Anxy because we all came from Medium where we put everything online, and we were creating this printed thing, and there, I don't think that we were trying to figure out, does publishing your print content online diminishes the purchase of the print content, right? Or do they supplement each other? Or my theory is that they probably might serve different audiences. So we used to talk a lot about The Office, where from what we learned at Medium, maybe it probably doesn't hurt, but we don't really know. And we could say that yes, people are buying less print things because they are consuming them online. Now, in the case of Anxy, I think it is a benefit for people to not consume it on the web and consume it in print. Because what happens is when you're on the internet, you get distracted, and all of a sudden you're connecting with the story that is very personal and very it might touch you in a way that you don't expect, and all of a sudden you get distracted. And it's not the experience that you want to have when you're trying to consume that type of content. So for us, it was important to allow people to disconnect and sort of like not have these distractions. But I understand that at the same time, people want to get value out of the content. So we have published some of our stories online, not everything. And it's something that we're still, trying to test out. But an interesting experience that we had was that we had one of our pieces republished by The Guardian, and it had like 100,000 views in like a weekend. And that really taught me a lesson of like the kind of reach you can have when you're online that just like an object that you have to go buy doesn't have. So there's a question there about, well, if you want more people to listen to the story, online does have that advantage. And for me, I think like the reason for the print is not just for the words, is really like people who are doing print today, part of the rationale is like doing it as an object that you want to have, that you want to look at, that you think it's beautiful. It's not just about reading the essay and then you're done with it and never look at it again. It's about having an object that you come back to. So I do think that some people should just not print because that's not the experience that they're trying to create. But for us, we wanted to create that experience, and now we're also trying to see like, well, maybe we shouldn't expand into digital because it has also so much reach that we can take advantage of.
Was there somewhere over? Yeah.
How do you keep your keep your vision true even when your audience and fads and trends are going against the grain, or trying to push you in a different direction than what your vision is?
Lovely question.
I can, yeah. Well, that's something that I get with Anxy a little bit because, you know, there's a lot of mental health content out there. It's more oriented towards recommendations and how-tos and things like that. And even when I get, you know, interviews or people ask me questions about, you know, Anxy or ask me to speak, they're like, oh, can you give us like the 3 things that we must take away today? And one thing that we're trying to do with the magazine is that we are trying for people to find their own way and not tell people, okay, this is how you're gonna, you know, repair your life or whatever. Like, we all find a different journey. So in terms of the vision, it's like, it's really important for us to be non-judgmental and try to like stay away from, you know, expressing the magazine in a way that feels like we're telling people what to do. But we had to, you know, in certain occasions, you know, ask an editor to not say this, or to avoid using these words, or to, you know, this thing and the other. And I feel like, you know, in my case, I think that I understand very clearly why I have those values, and I firmly believe that they are true, that if we just let people find their own way to what is, you know, reparative for them in their mental health process, that's going to be the best outcome. I think that sometimes it's hard to, you know, stay grounded when you don't have that deep sense of where those values are coming from, and that deep belief in why you're doing what you're doing, you know, against what other people might say. So, and you know, sometimes you can be wrong. So, but I think like you have to evaluate, like, okay, do I really believe in this deeply enough to just not listen to this?
Yeah, to build on that, I think you have to sort of know where the line is, right?
Right.
And know where you're willing to make concessions if you need to, and where you absolutely cannot, whether you're
Right.
standing on principle or you're standing on something else. It somewhat relates to the earlier question about sort of like the print or the web. You know, it's like you might have certain values about why you made the thing as a printed object, and that you might be okay with giving up that reach if you go into sort of the web sphere with it or something like that. So it's really about knowing where you stand and knowing where you can sort of have a little bit of leeway and other places where you can't.
Yeah, and I think you need to give yourself permission to change your mind.
Absolutely.
Because I've had the truth is, like, I myself look for advice online. So there's value to that to some extent, right? So yeah, like, I totally agree with that.
I'll say that I feel like I can't speak to the vision in the way you guys are talking about it, because it's sort of way bigger and there's more money and people involved in it, and there's more like stakeholders, when there's like absolutely zero stakeholders in a lot of the things that I make. But I also think in that respect, there's no compromise. Like, you don't have to make any compromise in a sense. And I don't think that's so, I mean, I guess my thought was that being small is not bad. You know, like doing something that has, like, starts off having limited reach isn't such a bad thing, because you allow yourself the ability to sort of have a vision and like see it through for a while before others get involved and start trying to like get their vision in there. You know what I mean? And although I have no intent of making things that are bigger, but I do think that wouldn't be such a bad idea to you know, things can start as a zine that 100 people look at, and maybe can grow to something larger once there is a vision. Because I don't always think there's a vision. When people start stuff, I highly doubt a lot of things I see out there have a vision.
No, and I actually think that for me, I was following this thread on Instagram with and actually like a furniture designer, and he was talking about brand anyway. But there's this thing of like, you know, I don't think there has to be a vision. I think like we can create our vision through making. And I think that's what I love about your work, John. That I feel like you're just making, and the vision kind of emerges as you make more, and then all these projects start connect to each other, and then you see that there is a larger narrative in them. And I think that, yeah, sometimes it's okay, like, to just go for it and figure the vision later, or never, you know?
I think, like, for me, I feel like mine maybe is a little bit the opposite. I was just like, we have this mission to help independent creators, and you know, that can look like a lot of different things, right? And like, I think that like why we're still here after like, I don't know, 7 years or something, is that we kind of stuck with that mission, and you know, the software evolved. It changes. It's like we're evolving with, you know, Kickstarter and like, you know, the way creators are doing things. And yeah, the thing about like changing your mind, like, you know, I think like for us, like the mission's pretty solid, and you know, times change, like the world changes, and so it's about being adaptive and you know, being okay with changing, you know, with the times. So I feel like, I mean, I get what you guys are saying, and I think that's a, you know, I think there's like multiple ways to kind of look at that.
We could do one more if someone has a burning last question. We could also end it there. Okay, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much to BackerKit. Thank you so much to our panelists. I think actually, did you want to close out with some?
Oh yeah, so we're hiring, so find me afterwards, and I'd love to talk to you guys. So
Yeah, right. We're here till 9, and we're all very nice, so please come and chat with us. We'd love to talk further about any of this. Okay, yay, goodbye, you're done. Thanks. That was great. That was so fun.
Good job.